there is this culture that is very misogynistic that creates this mindset, and we're going to talk about that with what do you call it, toxic masculinity a little bit later, and how social construct creates these things and these assumptions and beliefs and ways in which we have to live that then creates this mindset and this ways in which we live. It is not to say people are born that way. I don't believe that's the case. Research shows that people are not born of these behaviors, but it is ingrained based on society. Living in a patriarch type of society where men rule all, to be female or feminine or have anything feministic ingrained in you is considered bad. Okay. Anyway, there's a reason why I bring these words up so that we can have an understanding of why we're seeing what we're seeing and why women are fighting so hard for what they're fighting for, because it is a man's world. That is just the truth. I'd be lying if I said it any other way. So, okay. That being said, when we talk about toxic masculinity, I do not want anyone to go, oh, and be angry or upset about what they think it might mean. And there's a reason why I put the reading in there so that we can also understand it. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Toxic, it's just I'm going to get the better definition at the bottom because I wrote too much there. It is, I don't like that line. I'll read this one anyway. So, concept of toxic masculinity is not intended to demonize men or male attributes. That's not the idea here. Toxic masculinity isn't to say men are bad. That's not the point here. The idea here is to emphasize the harmful effects of conformity to a certain traditional masculine ideal, behaviors such as dominance, self-reliance, and competition, and violence. Okay, so it's not saying to be a man is bad. That is not the case. To have masculine traits is bad. That is not the thing we're trying to say. We're talking about the toxicity in which some of these behaviors are pushed on men or, society as a whole. Men don't cry. Well, that's not fair. You're a human being, for God's sake. If you don't cry, I would have some real concerns. Okay, so maybe you were taught not to, and so now you can't because you've developed that type of way of thinking, right? So this is when we talk about toxic masculinity. These are the things we're trying to talk about, the toxic traits of it, not the masculinity part. That's different. Femininity, masculinity, two totally different things here. Okay, that being said, we next go into gender dysmorphia. Okay, and so I want you to gender dysphoria. Okay, there's a reason why I bring this up, and so a lot of people have this huge argument about gender dysphoria. Recently someone was commenting on the girls, what is that, the Breakfast Girls Club or something that was on Netflix, anyway, about how they actually brought up gender dysphoria, and I had a friend freaking out. She's super angry. She's like, I thought this was G-rated, and I'm like, how is it not G-rated to talk about understanding who you are as a self? So I need you to understand that gender dysphoria, it's a conflict between the physical gender and the physical and the gender in which the person identifies with. So it's the physical and the identity. It has absolutely nothing to do with sexuality at all. It is not a sexuality. It is an identity. Are you born of are you a woman or are you a man? And as a human, I think you have a right to get to choose, like, I don't know, I was born of this body, but I'd like to be this, right? And I think it's fair because our minds and our bodies, I'm telling you, being a human is just absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I think to be stuck in a situation where you're trying to figure out who you are and then being told by society and all these things you can't, how maddening could that possibly be? Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit too, but understand that gender dysphoria has nothing to do with sexuality. It's truly, absolutely identity. Okay, body dysmorphia, a lot of you have probably heard this or maybe not. This is where you look in the mirror and what you see is not actually true. And you will take a thing where, like a small a thing no one in the world would ever see. Like you can barely see it, but all of a sudden it's this big thing, and it gets into your brain so bad, it actually changes how you react in social situations. It could be whether or not you take a shirt off when you go swimming, or and it's not wholly like, oh, I'm embarrassed, I'm out of shape. It's like a legitimate like an actual keeps you from doing stuff. My husband, he is amazing. He has that. He will not take his shirt off for swimming at all. It's bizarre. And there's no reason for it. There's no, wild scars. And even if there was, it would be nice if he felt comfortable enough to, be able to, take a shirt off and enjoy himself, right? So body dysmorphia is more of a, it's a minor flaw that can't be seen by others. But there's, a person is so embarrassed and ashamed and anxious that they will actually avoid situations in which they don't have to be either seen in that way or however. Again, swimming is the one thing I was kind of come up with, but there's more to it. So, again, in discussions, if something pops up, you're like, dude, I have this thing, let us know. We relate. There's always like something that we as humans will relate to and understand when it comes to this stuff. So, absolutely, for sure. Anyway, so in all these aspects, if there's things that you want to talk about with experience, totally. I talked before, don't throw in opinions. I don't want an opinion. You can talk about your experience, which is absolutely different than your opinion on the topic. Does that make sense? So again, I'm trying to pull you away from constantly going, well, I think, it's this maybe happened to you. Yes, that's an experience, but your opinion and feelings towards it is totally different. So anyway, that being said, trauma. I think a majority of us in some way, shape, or form, especially as we are going through all the things we're going through now, have experienced some type of source or moment of trauma. So it could be really little. So how do I say this? Trauma isn't always something that is a physical thing. Okay, so I'll give you the definition here. So it's a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. For everybody, that is different. For one person, which you'd be like, that's not that big of a deal. But to them, maybe you're hypersensitive or like an empath or whatever. You have that personality where that little thing is absolutely just traumatizing. Mine was really weird. Like I've had multiple. Mine's throwing up. I was so traumatized by throwing up when I was a kid that I developed emetophobia, which is a fear of throwing up. For some people, they're like, I throw up like once a night. Like, it's not that big of a deal. But for me, it is like physically debilitating because of one thing that happened to me as a kid. That's my trauma. I have others. It's not that big of a deal. The emetophobia thing is the one that really dominates my life. And I hate it. But it is what it is. So damage to the mind occurs as a result of a distressing event, right? So the trauma where now whenever I feel nauseous, I have a physical, like absolute, like panic, like I implode. It's weird. It's the craziest thing. That's my trauma. So often it's the result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one person's ability to cope. Or integrate the emotions involved with that experience. Okay, so again, trauma could be just about anything that creates this physical reaction. So not everyone has actually gone through that, but some of us have. And once we recognize it, we go, oh, that's a trauma response. I see now my reaction is from this said situation. And then you go back, you handle it, and you work through it, and then you understand it. I bring this up because some of the things we might be talking about might be triggering, which is a trauma response to something that has happened to you. So forgive me if there are things that we happen to talk about. You can message me and say, hey, this is a thing. Most students are like, they're there because they've dealt with it and they're like, look, I've got this. Or others are like, I can't talk about it. Can we skip over this thing? And that's okay. I totally get that. Just let me know. So I'm not assuming you're just, not wanting to do the assignment or whatever. So anyway, that then leads to our next word, which is bullying. Okay. So bullying is the use of force, coercion, a threat, abuse, aggressively dominating and intimidating someone. Like we know bullying. When I was in 8th grade, I cut my hair really short because I wanted to look like, I forget her name, Bobby, I think, from Northern Exposure. Oh, Maggie from Northern Exposure. And I cut my hair like a boy. And my mom just kept cutting and cutting. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I went to school and I was Kyle for a good year. And I really hated that name for a long time. But I'm over it now, I think. I don't know. But that was a trauma experience. But bullied to the point where I literally couldn't even like have lunch outside of like one of the classrooms, right? It was pretty bad. But anyway, so these are things like when we talk about bullying, we're talking about behavior that is repeated, it's habitual, it comes at you every day. One essential prerequisite is the perception that from the bully, the abundance of physical or social power, right? Like I thought I was in with the cool kids, and then one day I said something, and then I was just bullied to the point of like physical, like I couldn't even hang outside of a classroom, right? So anyway, this imbalance distinguishes a bully from a conflict. So if conflict is a fight, bullying is that consistent, repetitious type of behavior. So there's hostile intent, an imbalance of power. Someone's got more power than you or whoever's being bullied, and the repetition over time. Right, and that's when we talk about cyberbullying. That's the biggest thing. It's one thing if you have a conflict with someone. It's another thing if you're constantly ragging on someone over and over to the point where it's it's bullying. And bullying compared to harassment, they're kind of close. We don't talk about sexual harassment really in this class, but that is a type of harassment, which we'll get into that then. So it's an unlawful violence, like assault, battery, or stalking. I've had stalkers. I've been harassed. Like harassed online. I had someone who wouldn't let go of a topic and they kept messaging me. I'm like, bro, you don't want to talk, you want to argue, and I don't want to argue or talk to you, right? And that's harassment, to try and keep getting someone to go. And it's also a form of bullying too, right? That repetitious type of behavior. So threat of violence comes with harassment, to scare, annoy, something just to kind of, I had a guy recently at a job I was at who he was fired for sexual harassment. And why was that? Because he wouldn't let up. It was this consistent. So it's similar to bullying, but it's a different level, right? It's sometimes not intended to necessarily be like a bully and feel dominant as much as it is a consistency. It's like, dude, you're harassing me at this point. Okay, so there is a little bit of a difference between the two of those. So just keep that in mind if we talk about it. First Amendment right. I know a lot of people love to throw that out, especially with the elections coming. And we'll say here, so First Amendment right is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridgment of speech. Okay, but there's a level there. Okay, when we talk about freedom of speech in my class, there's also respect. So there's respect and there's freedom of speech, and then there's also the bullying in between where I'm like, you cannot bully. Bully does not belong in our classroom. So I bring this up in case you guys decide at some point to start a thing. Don't. I haven't yet, knock on wood. Y'all have been pretty good, but just keep that in mind. Okay, so it's the right of the people to peacefully assemble, right? To petition the government for redress of grievances, right? So, in other words, the idea here is that the First Amendment allows us to protest, to make a statement and say, nope, we're going to put a stop to that. So, and I think there is a beautiful part to that. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is taken, I think, in a wrong direction. When it becomes aggressive and hateful. And I think at some point the First Amendment right didn't say, hey, you should be an asshole, and here's this, amendment to give you the okay. I don't think that was the point. I think the point was to keep government in check, to keep us as a society in check. Of course, we abused it, but whatever. We're going to keep going with it. So if you're going to want to argue First Amendment rights in this class, come talk to me, all right? We'll have a little talk about that. Okay, so I do start this out saying that this is a feminine and the social self slide, but I don't talk very much about feminism because feminism is incredibly simple. The advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of sexes. That's it. They just want equality. All right, so a lot of people will argue, oh, she's a feminist, and all she does is support feminism, which again is just advocating for female rights. That's it. It's super simple. Okay. With this, though, when we talk about toxic masculinity and stuff like this, feminism is trying to make an address to that and say, this is the issue. This is why we have an issue, is because of this thing, this toxicity, okay? Not the manliness, not the masculinity, but the toxicity within it, which does this. Because it brings up, again, misogyny, right? Misogyny and this patriarch type of mentality where, and there's all this women hate, and it's like, can't win. Okay, so anyway, that is what we talk about when we're talking about all of this dialogue, understanding who we are and everything in between. That being said, we're going to go step in real quick to toxic masculinity. And the reason why I bring this up again, I want you to understand that so I'm going to give a couple quotes from the readings that we did because I feel that they actually kind of say it a little better than I probably could, hence why they're in quotes. So while gender identity is deeply held feeling of being a male, just as femininity is being that deeply held thing of being a female, people of different genders often act differently, not because of biological characteristics. So you're not masculine because of this or feminine because of this. It's not because of biological characteristics, but because of a rigid societal norms created around femininity and masculinity. Right? So gender identity is within us, absolutely. So when we talk about gender dysphoria, we're talking about people who are like, I mean, I'm a man, but I feel so feminine. I feel like a woman. And I feel it's fair to say, yeah, you can do that. You can because you do. To say and take the right away from someone to say, you can't feel that way, is taking away their humanity. Okay, so when we talk about toxic masculinity, we're talking about that overarching toxic aspect of not letting someone feel like, say you do feel feminine on the inside, you can be. Why can't you? Is my question, right? It is a feeling that you have on the inside that is making you question, who are you? What are you? And that's what we do in life, is try to identify who we are and where we belong. So again, toxic masculinity is designed to describe not masculinity itself. So it's not masculinity we're talking about, but the form of gendered behavior that results when expectations of what it means to be a man growing up. Again, that idea of don't you cry, men don't do that, or this toxic idea of what it means to be a man. Because what happens is it starts to develop these habits and behaviors, again, that actually become hateful towards women. Toxic masculinity actually leads to misogyny, where you're so afraid of being feminine on the inside that you actually start to hate women on the outside. It does create this reaction to understanding that feminine side of all humans, X's and Y's, guys. We've all got the pieces. Okay, so men are not naturally violent. In all the research that we're seeing, naturally is not necessarily the case where men are considered violent, but it is developed through society, through social constructs, through toxic masculinity. Okay, so through a culture that equates masculinity with physical power, some men and boys are invariably feel like they are failing at being a man. I have a great friend of mine. He's a big guy. He's like, could be a bouncer. He wears the nail polish. He colors his hair. He wears very goth makeup. He wears the dresses with the tights. And why not? Why can't he? Right? And his actual conversation is, I don't want to fall into a he or a she. I just want to be. I like these things. They feel good. I like to be able to express myself. Like, I hate the idea, and this is him, I hate the idea that I have to conform to anything when these are just the things that I like because I like them. It's that simple. It actually is. But we try and make all these black and white, you must be this, you must be that we get in the way of someone expressing just the things that they like. You can like fishnet stockings. That's totally okay. You can wear them. There's no reason why that needs to be inappropriate or hated or looked down upon or you considered to be failing as a male, right? You are human, absolutely, and you're doing human things. And that's what we're looking for here. All right, so where are we going? For these particular men and boys, toxic masculinity has created a vacuum in their lives that can be filled through violence, right? So now that you take away this thing, what happens is it starts to absorb and take in these behaviors. And so this is when people start to get into groups what do we got? So we maybe alt-right. There's kind of some examples. This is not a personal attack on any other thing, or these things in which people kind of fall into because they envelop this very masculine feel, where it's like, I'm a man, you're a man, we're men, and it creates this mindset of like, and again, this is no diss to any of them. This is just where, unfortunately, these behaviors start to brew and become a thing. Right? So the idea here is through these behaviors in these groups. In fact, I don't know if you remember, I think it was in 2014, there was a guy down south who just was driving by and literally shooting women at the campus down in Santa Barbara. He's shooting up this campus at the women. And then it turns out, after he passes on, they find a manifesto full of hate towards women. Absolute misogyny to the nth degree. And then they find a chat room in which he's involved in that just spews all of that. And it's shocking. It's shocking the amount of hate that it develops. And if you're doing any research paper on misogyny and these types of behaviors, like what is causing this, right? This absolute hatred towards women. Is it the fear of being feminine so much that you start to hate anything feminine? I don't know. Based on what I've researched, I believe that to be the case. You could probably do more and, I guess put me in my place. I don't know. But this is what it tends to be from, is that fear. Okay, hate always comes from fear. Think about that next time you're afraid of something or you hate something. It usually comes from fear. Okay, so again, communities and groups, they restore this agency that these parties wrongly equate with manhood. All right, we assume that if they're in these groups or doing these things, that makes it manly. And then again, that's where this toxicity is starting to develop. So anyway, this is our understanding of what it means. It doesn't mean being a dude is bad. That's not the case. Or, being a white dude is bad. This is not what we're talking about. We're just trying to understand where every single one of these things lie, what privilege might be, what our understanding of our gender and our identity comes from. Okay, toxic masculinity is done. Again, we're going to go into gender dysphoria, because I want you to understand that it is a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender with which that he, she, or they identify. So you'll notice in my name, I let you know that I'm a she and a her, because that way because I think it's fair for us to now to be able to break free and go, I could be whatever the hell I want. Please do. That's beautiful. And I wonder what I would have been had, I grew up with 2 boys, and to be feminine, which I really, really was when I was young, but to be feminine was bad, right? And so I was a boy then, and I would put the boy hat on, and I would tuck my hair up, and I'd be boy, boy, boy. Well, when I was Kyle, and I cut my hair really short, I went other extreme, and I was like, no, I'm a girl, I do girl things, right? And I pushed the femininity aspect, which I'll be honest with you, I love being feminine. I love that shit. I also like being rough and tumble. Like, I don't want to be pegged by a thing. I want to be able to be all things. And I think all people should have the right and freedom to do all things, to be human and to experience humanness on whatever level it takes. I think that's what we're trying to ultimately lean towards when we talk about these things, like understanding that gender dysphoria has absolutely nothing to do with sexuality. It's just who I feel like